Karanja, I am born again. I want to welcome the missioners again. Welcome and may God bless you for the good work that you have been doing throughout the week, and also to the members of the church, may God continue to bless you. I also want to thank the Reverend and also the youth leadership for entrusting me to share the word this morning. And I won't take a lot of time, I promise. So today we are going to learn about a certain man in the Bible. We know him very well and we've read his story a couple of times. And this man is Moses. And we are going to do a small background about Moses so that we can understand how Moses got to write the book of Psalms chapter 90. And so as we all know, Moses, he was raised in Pharaoh's palace. God called him through a burning bush. He was also called so that he will go and lead the Israelites out of Egypt and free them from captivity. And throughout this process, Moses watched so many miracles that Jesus performed. And also he got to witness some of the plagues that God had sent so that Pharaoh can release the children of Israel, or the Israelites. And we also get to see another miracle in the life of Moses, which was he was able to part the Red Sea so that the Israelites might find a way to cross through and get to the promised land. And we also get to see the very many promises that God had given Moses, and he had also promised him that he would get to the promised land. But somewhere along the way, Moses never got to the promised land. Sindio? Yeah. Why didn't he get to the promised land? Yes. And he was also disobedient to God because God had told Moses to speak to a rock. But Moses, because he was so angry, he decided to strike the rock. And so because of that small act of disobedience, everything else that Moses had done, because remember, they journeyed with the Israelites for 40 years so that they would get to the promised land. So everything that Moses had worked for, from the time that he was in Egypt up to that point, ilishia hiyo point ya disobedience. And you can imagine how Moses felt, because 40 years is not a short time. He had fulfilled what God had told him all through, but because of that one mistake, because of that one disobedience, Moses had to face the consequence of his action, and so he was not allowed to go into the promised land. And so, towards the end of Moses' story, because we cannot read the story of Moses, it will take us a lot of time. And so, towards the end of the story of Moses, we get to see that Moses experienced some losses. Moses experienced grief because Moses lost his sister. The sister died, Miriam. And for someone as close as a sister to die, you can imagine the kind of grief that Moses had to go through. It must have been very painful. And then he was also told, of course, that he would not go into the promised land. And also, because he could not go into the promised land, there had to be another priest that was assigned because he was no longer the priest. And so they went to the mountain of, I think it's the mountain of Hor with his brother Aaron, and he saw the priestly robe being put on Aaron's son. Remember, this is the robe that Moses had carried all through, but now towards the end of his journey, it's been given to another person. Probably Moses didn't expect that this is what was going to happen towards the end. Because for Moses, probably he had envisioned that wataenda, he will get into the promised land, he will still remain to be their leader. But no, towards the end, Moses now gets to experience all these losses. And even the priestly duty that he had, it was designated to another person. Now I've given you a short background so that we get to understand now Psalms 90. And this psalm is attributed to Moses, or rather people say that probably Moses wrote this psalm when he was going through these losses, when he was told that he's not going to enter the promised land, when he witnessed so many people dying, when his also priestly duty was given to another person. And so as we read this psalm, let's read it with understanding as we read through the various verses. So we are going to read the whole chapter. We can read together. Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, wherever you have formed the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. You turn man to destruction and say, return, O children of men. For 1,000 years in your sight are like yesterday when it is past, and like a watch in the night. You carry them away like a flood in the waters. In the morning they are like grass which grows up. In the morning it flourishes and grows up. In the evening it is cut down. You have set our iniquities before you, our sins. For all our days have passed away in your wrath, we finish our years like a sigh. The days of our lives are 70 years, and if by reason of strength they are 80. Who knows the power of your anger? For as we fear of you, so is your wrath. So teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Return, O Lord, how long, and have compassion on his others. O satisfy us with your mercies, that we may rejoice and be glad all our days. Make us glad according to the days in which you have afflicted us, the years in which we have seen evil. Let your work appear to your servants, and your glory to their children. Let the beauty of the Lord our God be upon us, and establish the work of our hands. Yes, establish the work of our hands. Amen. So let's go back to verse 1. And so from verse 1 to verse 6, we get to see that Moses is testifying of the things that he had seen throughout the generations. He says that the Lord has been their dwelling place, verse 2. And he lived through these years whereby he says that the mountains were being brought forth, and even the earth and the world was formed. And verse 3. You turn man to destruction and say, return, O children of men. Verse 4. Yes, Moses says that for 1,000 years in your sight are like yesterday when it passed, and like a watch in the night. So Moses had witnessed how, like, the generations that had died, and so he gets to see that really 1,000 days are just but like a day in God's sight. Because Moses had lived with these people, very close people to him, and he actually watched them die, sorry. And so he says, like 1,000 years, it may seem like 1,000 years to us, but to God, it's just but like a day. Verse 5, he says that God carries them like a flood, and they are like sleep in the morning, like grass which grows up. And he says that in the morning the grass flourishes and it grows up, but by the time it gets to the evening, it withers and it can even be cut down. Verse 7. For we have been consumed by your anger and your wrath, and by your wrath we are terrified. So from verse 1 all the way to verse 7, Moses is testifying of the things that he saw. Like when he was living with the Israelites throughout the 40 years, these are the things that Moses witnessed. He witnessed people dying. He saw that like 1,000 years are nothing. Like for us, we can see like 1,000 years are very many days. But to the Lord, it's like just but a day. He witnessed like people, the grass grows and it withers. Like for us, we see that it can take a lot of time, but to the Lord, it really doesn't take that much time. And so he lived through all these days. Let's go to verse 10. And so now, after Moses has told us what he saw when he was here on earth, Moses now starts to count. And Moses says that the days of our lives are 70 years, or even by reason of strength, they are 80 years. Yet their boast is only labor and sorrow, for it is soon cut off and we fly away. So Moses anatuwekea hiyo miaka, anasema that the years that a man should live are 70 to 80 years. If you do your math correctly, if you count it in days, it's like 29,000 days only. If you do the math. So if you take your years right now minus 29,000, unawezaona umebakisha siku ngapi. But of course we know that God is going to satisfy us with a long life, past and age. But now Moses now sits down and starts to count because now he's reflecting. Because Moses, even after Moses was told that he was not going to enter the promised land, he wasn't bitter. He accepted what God had told him. Because it would have been very normal for Moses to say, but God, I have done this for you all these years. How can you do this to me? You know, it was just that one mistake. Moses didn't argue. He wasn't bitter about it, but he just accepted what God had told him. And so now, as he was writing this psalm, he was reflecting that the years of a man are like 70 to 80 years. And so in verse 12, sorry, he makes a very powerful prayer because he saw that human beings, okay, for us human beings, it can be very easy to live through probably even 100 years. Alafu tu hiyo maisha tu umekaa tu ukiteseka in this world because we are born, we are taken to school, we go through the system, tunasoma, tunatafuta kazi, tunaanza kutafuta pesa. Like if it's not one thing, it's another. And we are always looking for the next best thing. And so because this is the life that we live, and of course we have to work, we have to go to school. But Moses recognizes and says that is not what life is all about. Life is not all about the work that we do. It is not all about the careers that we pursue. Because he recognized akaona that it can be very easy for us to get caught up in our work, in pursuing our careers, that we forget what God brought us here on earth to do, like what truly matters. So you can read that verse again. 12. So teach us in our ways that we may gain a heart. Yes. So Moses is telling God to teach them to number their days, and by numbering their days, hamaanishi kuzihesabu. He's telling God, awafundishe how to live these days with meaning. Because you see, as vile tu tumesema, we can get so caught up in pursuing our careers and they are good. we can get so caught up in doing work and wanting to do more and more, and it is good. But Moses is recognizing that you cannot know how to live through life if God does not teach you. And God is the only one who can give you the wisdom on how to live your everyday life. Because you see, even in the career that you're pursuing, or even in the job that you're doing, ni Mungu tu anaweza kudirect. Because you might find yourself in a place where God never intended you to be in the first place. So God is the only one who can give us wisdom. And because we are taught things that we do not know. So if we are being taught, that's why we go to school to be taught, because we do not know. And so you have to allow God to teach you what these days that He gave you are for, so that you may live a fruitful life, and so that you may live the life that God intended you to live. And so, an example that we normally do, everyone does it. We usually count our days, and most of the times in December, probably December kikaribia kuisha, towards the end of the year, we usually sit with ourselves and reflect how that year has been. And then we are like, okay, I achieved this, I never got to achieve this, I had so many goals for this year. And then sasa unaamua next year nita-lock in, nita-focus. Alafu unaandika goals, unasema will be going to the gym, fitness, nini. Alafu you start very well in January. You say that you're going to be reading your Bible more often, you're going to be praying more often. But somewhere in February, sasa kinaisha tu. Unashangaa kwani iliendaje, the way I was focused. And so, you see, in your calendar, you're just presented with days. Your calendar doesn't give you wisdom. Inakupea tu the days. And so, when you count those days, hivyo ukisema nitafanya, nilifanya, nini, that alone does not produce wisdom. And so, even when you're counting, sometimes unaanza panic because you're like, I am running out of time. I had so much goals, I have so many goals. Na sijaachieve, I've not even gotten to half of those goals, and it's already half of the year. I don't know how many goals you've achieved that you set. And you start feeling like you're running out of time. And so unajaribu sasa ku overwork, you compensate for the lost time that you would have, worked for what you wanted. And so, Moses, upper in this verse, we see that he does not only pray that Mungu amfunze what these days are for. He prays for a more important thing, which is a heart of wisdom, just so that he may understand what these days are truly, truly meant for. And so, let's go to verse 17, the last verse. And it says, and let the beauty of the Lord our God be upon us, and establish the work of our hands. Yes, establish the work of our hands. And we see that Moses doesn't just leave it at establish the work of our hands. He gets to a point of like, he's begging God. He's telling him, yes, God, establish the work of our hands. And in this case, Moses wants God to establish what he had done for him all those years. But sadly, Moses never lived to see what God would establish. But we here, we get to read about Moses, and we can see the established work of Moses. Because we see, like, the first 5 books of the Bible, Moses is the one who wrote them. They still are there. So God established that. We still also get to see the leadership. We still learn from the leadership of Moses. So yes, indeed, God established the work of Moses. And so even as for in our lives, you need to tell God, as He teaches you. So you get to verse 10, and you tell Him, to teach you to number your days. When God teaches you to number your days, God is going to show you why He created you. He's going to reveal your purpose more. He's going to tell you, okay, this is the career that you should pursue. You shouldn't go this way. And He will also tell you, I need you to serve me in this more. I need you to be devoted in this area more. And so when God gives you now a heart of wisdom, you start implementing those things, and then you continue living in the promises of God, you continue living in the purposes of God. And then now in verse 17, but verse 17 cannot be implemented if you've not first asked God to teach you to number your days. And by numbering your days, we've said, it's not just the counting ati niko na 29,000 days minus the 10,000 I've already lived through. It's you telling God to help you to know like why He created you. And then I pray for a heart of wisdom so that you may know how to implement what God is going to tell you. And then now we go to verse 17, where now you pray and you beg God. You beg God because God, you beg Him because with God you can beg Him. You tell Him to establish the work of your hands. That whatever you do in your everyday life, in the job that you do, in the career that you do, that God is going to establish it. That even in the service of the Lord that you do, that God is going to establish it. And that God will also help us to understand that service to Him comes first, and then our lives now, the careers, the jobs, they come second, because there is nothing that you can place above God. And so when you work for God diligently, and then when you do the work that He has given you here on earth to do diligently, then you can pray this prayer in Psalm 90 verse 17, that the Lord will establish the work of your hands. And just as we have seen that Moses' work was established, never got to see it, but for us we can see it. And God is going to help you that your legacy will live even after you. That people are going to be reading about you, people will be hearing about you as well. And so, as I finish, so this prayer that Moses makes is not for the people who panic, because we have said that if we count those 80 years, probably there are 29,000, and you can see probably zenye umebakisha hapo, but you do not have to panic about the number of years that are left. But this prayer is for those who have rest. In the morning when we were praying, we have read that the verse that the presence of God will be with us and that He will give us rest. And so this prayer is not for the people who have panicked, they are the people who have rested, knowing that God is going to give them wisdom on how to live every day. Yes, so that we understand what these days are truly for. And also in John chapter 5, we get to see the miracle that Jesus performed on a man. I don't know, he was in somewhere. Okay, now a certain man was there who had an infirmity for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he already had been in that condition a long time, he said to him, do you want to be made well? The sick man answered him, Sir, I have no man to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up, but while I am coming, another steps down before me. Jesus said to him, rise up and walk. Yes, let's reach there. So in this miracle, we can see the first response of this is a beggar, this beggar. And the first response of this man is he starts giving God excuses, because the first thing that Jesus asks him is, do you want to be healed? So this man, after Jesus asks him, do you want to be healed? This man starts saying, but God, you know, but Jesus, you know, I have no man to put me in the pool, what. Like he starts giving excuses. It's like he was very familiar in that situation, that he didn't know what life would be without it. And so after he explained to Jesus, Jesus eventually healed him. But even for us here today, there are so many things we have inside us that Jesus is asking us this morning, do you want to be healed? Probably you've been praying to God to help you to get rid of probably anger, pride, bitterness, and probably there's something you want God to remove from you in your heart. But Jesus is asking you this morning, do you actually want to be healed, or are you comfortable there? Because you see this man, when Jesus asks him, unataka kupona, anaanza kuambia Jesus mambo mingi. But now when Jesus asks you, do you want to be healed? Do not don't look down upon yourself ama usijihurumie sana in that situation because you're too familiar with it. When Jesus asks you, do you want to be healed? Yes, you tell him, yes, Jesus, I want to be healed. Because he already knows your history. And he doesn't need more excuses. He just needs to work with your faith. And so, we shouldn't give God excuses. So whatever He asks you to, if He wants to do something for you, let Him. If God wants to work in your life, give Him that opportunity to work in your life without giving Him excuses. And so, when we go back to the story of Moses, just to finish with this, take us back to verse 12. Yeah. Yes, I'm going to end with this. And I'll read it again. So teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. I want us to make this our prayer today, that Jesus will reveal to us and that God will reveal to us what He created us to do in this life. That we won't just waste our lives away with doing the things of the world, that when the day, when Jesus comes back, we will not have anything to present to Him. Because it takes wisdom and it takes the hand of God and it takes God for us to know what He made us to do here on this earth. And so, as I finish the last time, um, earlier this week, I wasn't feeling well, and I did go to school for a couple of days, and I was feeling so bad. And normally, when I don't feel well, I usually pray, naambia Mungu, God, please heal me. I know that by your stripes I am healed. But this particular week, I was feeling very weak, and I was so sick. And I did not understand why is not God hearing me haraka na venye hizo time zingine huwa naomba alafu napona haraka, because hii ilikuwa inakaa iko prolonged. But when I was told that I was going to preach because I have stood in for someone else, I was like, and then I asked God, I shouldn't have agreed to preach. But then I told God, when I come to stand at your altar, I know that I will be healed, and whatever is left is going to be healed completely. And I am healed completely. And so, yes, we're going to sing a song, but I don't know if it's there. In relation to this verse, we have said that you have to allow God to teach you, and you also have to allow God to lead you. And so we are going to sing this song so that we can tell God to teach us. It's vile kimya Kristo wale
iko